The issue of race in America can be complicated these days. Some believe racism is very prevalent in our society. Others say racism is a thing of the past. And then you have some Americans who simply voice even just a hint of being critical of racial justice policies, and they can be labeled a racist. Why is that? Is this fair, unfair? We're going to discuss this dichotomy. We're going to talk about the racism argument used in both politics and the media, and other related racial issues as well. And joining me now to discuss the issue of race in America are the co-hosts of the very popular Healing Race podcast, Todd Levinson and Andre Thomas. Prior to their podcast, Todd Levinson designed various programs to help communities all over the U.S. promote more solutions with less partisan politics. Todd also helped create local, state, and national workforce policies to help Americans find better career skills. Andre Thomas, the other co-host of the Healing Race podcast, is a tech enthusiast. Andre has over 20 years of corporate experience in the ops fields, product development, and data analytics for various Fortune 500 companies. Thank you both so much for being here.
Great to be here, David.
What's up, David?
Hey, Andre and Todd. Thank you both. Now listen, I want to begin, talk about your background, how you met each other, and then what was the reason for personally beginning this new podcast, Healing Race? Todd, and then to Andre.
Yeah, we met as roommates in college. So we got randomly paired together, and out of that grew an almost now 30-year close friendship. In that 2020, amid the racial reckoning and backlash that happened at that time, I all of a sudden had the realization that we had never, ever, in almost 25 years at that point, had a conversation about race. And I had to wonder, is that part of the problem or is it part of the solution? And what I came to realize is that if we don't have honest, open conversations about the views that we have, the experiences that we have, how can we navigate and solve the racial challenges that so divide us and create so much conflict? And so began our conversation. We started recording conversations so that people could see what a conversation that is open, real, honest, constructive could look like. And now we bring on guests, random people having conversations so that we show that anyone can have this conversation and have it be meaningful, productive, and move us toward a better place.
Andre, same question for you. Your background, your relationship with Todd, and certainly why you began the Healing Race podcast.
Sure. I met Todd here. There I was, a Texan, had been admitted to the university and never set one toe in the state of California until the day I literally showed up for orientation. So it was all new to me. And I walked into a room and saw this white man and thought to myself, well, this will be interesting. I wonder how this will go. And like Todd said, nearly 38, we're not that old, 30 years later, it has sparked an intellectual and very thriving friendship between the two of us. And then he approached me in, I want to say, early 2021 to start this podcast, to quote unquote, talk about race. And my first reaction is, he for real? And then my second reaction is, I really don't feel like getting into all of this. I'm going through a pandemic, whatever. But, when you talk yourself off the ledge and things in life, I said to myself, if he really wants to know and he's earnest in his intention, then I will, share my feelings about race in America and how it has impacted my life.
Amazing. Now, before we further our discussion, because we're going to delve into several issues, we took our cameras to the streets to follow the both of you around as you took your Healing Race podcasts on the road, so to speak, all throughout Southern California. And here is some of that video.
Excuse me? PBS is featuring our show called Healing Race, and we're all about kind of having open, positive, constructive conversations about race in the country and how we improve.
There's no such thing as race.
Would you be open to a conversation?
Yeah, but there's no such thing as race. It was created. It's a concept that was created to separate people.
And do you think in the country people do treat each other based on the idea of race, and how would you?
Well, politically, yes.
Okay.
Because it's a divisional system. It's the same thing with religion.
I was originally raised colorblind, and it took me a while to learn that's not a good thing.
Why do you think it's not a good thing?
Because the fact that as a Caucasian woman, I can't be blind to the fact that if there's someone pulled over by a police officer, I should stop because I'm going to be a witness. And I can't assume that if I'm colorblind that person is going to go through the same experience as me. You just have to recognize the fact that we do have inequities, that if you're colorblind, then you're just ignorant to the fact that there are things that other people go through that we don't, and we really can't be an ally if we can't recognize that it's not just, someone is a different skin color, it's someone is a different skin color, so they have a whole life different experiences than I would have.
Have you had conversations about race in your own life?
Well, I have, but for the most part, it's been an internal conversation on how to accept what's happening, how to understand it, learn from it, and then reflect that back out to the people that I interact with on a daily basis.
Yeah. If you had a chance to sit down in kind of a diverse, multiracial group and ask any question within your race or across race, what would be the most burning questions? You knew you were going to be met by curiosity and openness, rather than blowback, right? What would you ask? What would you want to know more about or discuss more?
Cultural differences, but more specifically, the family interactions within those.
Okay.
Whether or not
would you want to know more about how black family interactions?
I believe I would, but also let's not discount the rest of the entire world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And learning how they do it in all of
various cultures.
Thank
Totally, yeah.
And what makes you curious about that? Why do you think having the conversation about how we culturally interact would make a difference, would be meaningful for you?
Mm-hmm. I'll repose that.
Yeah.
And then having the opportunity to not only talk to the black culture and see how they feel and see their side.
Yeah.
There's also the opportunity to talk to folks in Europe, in the Middle East, in Africa, and find out how we are affecting them and vice versa.
Yeah.
So it's a worldwide
question
and results in a great perspective because it's not a small piece of the pie. It's trying to present the whole pie.
What have been some of the internal conversation like you've had with yourself and maybe some of that tension that has been brought up?
That's a great question. Because I think a lot of people ask that of themselves.
Yes.
A lot of people fail to understand that, or they put it by the wayside because life can get in the way.
It does.
Family, children, immediate needs.
Yes.
But I think once you have the opportunity to take that big step back and take the time for yourself to try and learn, to try and understand and try and reflect back.
I do not like that we always have to have the race talk. Like, it gets bothersome over time.
It does, okay.
Question, because you have your sons. Have you had the race talk with your son?
I have, especially my oldest son right now, and we just moved to this area. So more so, yes, gang talk and then like race.
What did you say in the race talk?
The race talk is always treat people how you want to be treated. Make sure that we're spreading love. If someone is different, it's okay. Like, indifferences are okay to have.
In your experience, do you have conversations about race across the racial divide?
You have white
a diverse
friends?
group of people?
Yeah.
And do y'all talk about this kind of stuff, you and your white friend? Why not?
I feel like it's nothing that like.
Because this is my white friend, and in 30 years, I didn't even want to go there.
Right.
And I was like, fine, I'll release on you.
Sometimes, not to be offensive, but the white community don't understand the black community. I feel like a lot of times they don't understand how many black kids, black mothers, black fathers have got killed over simple things. Or Trayvon Martin, he died a few years ago. That was, you know, like, and I think a lot of times stuff happens and just gets swept under the carpet.
What's this, you know, how do you feel about race relations in the country right now? And the ability to have open dialogue about it, the need for it, or
even
not?
in your own friend group, if you have white friends or black friends?
I would say socially, I think that we can have those conversations. Professionally, I think that there's a lot of people that still struggle.
Really?
Yeah, like within my industry, it's definitely still.
Okay.
What is your industry?
So I work in mechanical construction, so the construction industry. But which is obviously, well, and where I'm from, it's predominantly white males, right? White older males.
Yes.
Yeah. It can be a little bit of a sensitive topic for, I think, them to accept. Yeah.
Is it a conversation you've tried to have, or is it?
Well, there's a big thing, I guess, a big initiative, you know, going on with DEI, right? And so a lot of those like table talk conversations. And so it's not, I guess, me personally, but when we do come to the table, you can kind of just see the uncomfortability sit in. But there are some people who are really open to like, okay, that was an ignorant or uneducated thing to say, right? And then we have the conversation.
So you have times when you come to the table and you notice that there's discomfort, but then once you have the conversation, does it go to a constructive place? Do you feel like everyone is
or
able
do they
to
shut
be
down?
open?
I think it's both. I think it can be both.
We can't be so quick to let the stereotypical judgments of what society has for us be that for us.
Okay.
Like, we can control our own mindset, we can control our own thoughts, and we can't always think that other people think like us.
Yes.
It's about putting yourself in other people's shoes. They didn't have the same experiences we had. You know what I'm saying? And we didn't have the same experiences you had. So I can't be mad for this guy just being more, it was genuine.
Yeah.
It was just curiosity. It was him just off his speculation of what he thought. So I can't be mad at that. I didn't sense he was just trying to BS me or anything like that. So again, that's where we can be the answer, this generation.
Talk about the video we just played for our viewers, some of the people you interviewed. What your takeaways were, Andre, and then to Todd.
We were in Venice Beach, which in my travels to California, I'd never visited before. It was a lovely place. And one of the first participants, really opened up with about his experiences with race. And I just expected the day to be kind of run-of-the-mill sort of, common arguments and things that I've heard about race over the years. But he really started to unburden about his racial past and ways in which he had used racial epithets, the N-word specifically. And then he was motivated to hug me. And that, even as I sit here in this moment, was hugely validating. And I told him I don't need your acknowledgement, but thank you. But then as I meditated on the day, I feel as though I did need the acknowledgement because he was a white person that saw me. I endeavor in this exercise with Todd to help people see how they are participants in this phenomenon that we call racism, right? And black and white relations. Even if you believe that it doesn't land at your doorstep, you are participating in it by virtue of being in this country. And that doesn't necessarily mean you need to actively do something or all of a sudden become, some super hyperactive ally, but one of the simplest things a person could do to help the situation and to start the conversation is just to acknowledge another person's emotional experience. And that was absolutely amazing. And my life is enriched by that day.
Just to build on what Andre said, in terms of our participation in the way that race relations unfolds in the country, you saw two individuals, one white, one black, talk about reflecting on the ways that we respond when something racial comes up. And I think at the very least, we can all take ownership for the way that we are responding, and whether, as one of the white male, said, whether we're getting the whole pie, the whole set of experiences. That's the biggest thing that has come out of Andre and my conversation, our conversations with guests, is that people are complicated. They're nuanced. And you may know a very little sliver of their beliefs about politics, about race, about society, but you know so little about the depth of who they are and what drove them and led them and shaped them to have those views. And What we've learned through understanding both each other and our guests is that people are complicated. We had a white male conservative from the Northeast area. The question that he brought to our show is, I grew up in poverty. I built a small business. And when I hear that I have white privilege, it is hard for me to stomach. Are you telling me that I have white privilege? Now, he also brought up questions about DEI and the way that it's done. Now, on the surface, someone might have certain views of this individual, right, based on his objections. But when you understand the background story and when they engage in real open conversation, you see, one, the nuance behind his views, and two, how much common ground there actually is when you get the whole story.
I hear this argument constantly. Some people tell me we're talking about race too often, right? In other words, is the word racist being overused, let's say, for example, in the media sphere with the identity politics? Then there's also sort of this narrative, and I know both of you have heard it, if you support Donald Trump and MAGA, or you believe in an America First agenda, you're all of a sudden automatically a racist. If you believe in, let's say, for example, law and order, right? More cops on the streets, you can be deemed a racist. If you believe the migrant situation at the border is out of control and you dare use the words illegal immigration, you're identified as racist. Is this fair, Andre? Is the word racist overused in the media, in the political discussion? And then we'll get Todd's take on that.
I recently heard the U.S. Poet Laureate Amanda Gorman in a poem cite that empathy is our emancipation. And empathy is a 360 thing. It's all the way around. And for those who would try to indict others as you are racist, and this is a lesson I really had to learn, that I was casually throwing around the word racist when a situation could have been racial, but I'm indicting a person's character and have a care with that word. And I would say both, when you have a care with your speech, you should also have a care with another person's experience and probably their pain. And you should try to see life from their point of view. When, race is an experiential thing in the United States. And I recently told someone, when you don't see the needle move in your lived experience, it could feel as though nothing is happening. And then out of the frustration, you want to lash out. And that's where that kind of community comes in, both for me, I'm Black, I self-identify as Black, my Black community in helping me feel bolstered and supported in life. And also, as I like to use the term, talking yourself off the ledge, such that you don't have white people who are your enemy all the time. So taking a beat and stepping back, even because we can't control the media and how things are produced and what's said. However, we can control our reaction and the framework by which we listen and analyze what's coming to us. And just that proactive participation in your own life really can help you evaluate what is something that's really racially motivated and requires a proportionate response versus other things in life. And that does happen.
I know with your podcast, you talk to so many Americans who, as Andre and I just talked about, as I mentioned, they're kind of exhausted hearing the word racism, racist over and over again. They argue, because I talk to them when I'm on my stories, you talk to the people on your podcast, it's kind of a narrative maybe for progressive politicians, you could say, with their identity politics argument, even those in the liberal media who are real progressives, and they can often refer to anyone they disagree with as a racist. That's just the truth. However, with that said, also on your podcast, I know both of you, Todd, Andre, you talk to many Americans who insist, listen, we cannot ignore the fact there are overt acts of racism today. Certainly they argue things like, with policing, with housing, job opportunities, what have you. So Todd, and then back to Andre. Todd, how do you balance out kind of this narrative, which is sort of very different depending upon who you talk to?
I get concerned that we have to make a choice. Either we run away from race conversations, or our race conversations are about yelling and calling each other out. And I think my question would be, why can't we just have better, more meaningful, more human conversations? I bet most of the viewers out there watching this right now want to see that and might actually participate if given the right environment where they knew it was going to be productive. we had an individual who wasn't in the video that we watched, but he was in Newport, and he didn't want to have so much conversation about race. He didn't want race to enter so many aspects of our conversations. Now, when I shared with him the experience of one of our guests, so the example here being woman, Black woman, she grew up having gone to schools that were mostly white, mixed, and mostly Black. She had a variety of different experiences. And when she was in a mostly white school, she befriended and had a really strong relationship with a white male. And at some point took an interest in him and had the courage to ask him out on a date. He got red in the face and said, "Oh, I can't date a Black girl." Now imagine how that feels. That same individual in Newport, when he heard that story, had an audible oomph, right? It hit him in the gut. And that's not to say that every interaction is laced with some kind of racial bias, but these are real experiences that people have. And I think we can have those conversations in a productive manner, both ways. Andre asked me, what was it like to grow up white? That was his first question to me. And I said, I don't know. I never even thought about my race. And he said, that's a luxury. And I knew it was a luxury that I didn't have to think about it, right? But through my sharing with him, he gets a little window into why it might be so hard for some people who never had to think through a racial lens to understand what it's like to so often regularly have to think through a racial lens and deal either themselves or through their networks with those kinds of experiences. That's not the only experience we heard. Right? We heard another Black woman who talked about a great friend she had in her childhood who wanted to bring her to her church. And her mom said, we can't bring a Black person to our church, right? These are not experiences that are necessarily happening all the time, right? But they do happen and they have an impact. And I think it can be productive to talk about our experiences and what shaped our views of how we want to proceed with race relations.
So with that said, Andre, how do you balance out the two narratives of how people talk about, well, there's no racism, right? Which certainly that is not the case, versus there is a terrible amount of racism in the United States.
I balance it out by remembering that we're dealing with a life and we're dealing with emotions and we're dealing with the lived experiences of people. And so on both sides of the aisle, as I quoted, Amanda Gorman, our empathy is our emancipation. So in order to free yourself and to not feel any sense of, constraint, you're going to have to look at a person as a person. And I've struggled with that in these conversations because it does feel deflating to hear the white point of view when you feel as though you have been that you are the aggrieved party, right? But I had to sit in those emotions and sit in that discomfort. And I have encouraged others to just hear out the other side. This was not a part of Healing Race, but I was talking to a very lovely young woman who is white. And she was telling me how she feels a sense of tension when sometimes she is around Black women. She works in the restaurant industry and, Black women come, to celebrate things. And she said, I've seen them asked to be either served or sit in another place for my Black coworkers. And she was willing to lean into that, right? And lean into the discomfort of how that made her feel, but also recognize, well, that's something that Black people have been going through, for a very long time. And yes, it's happened to me, but now this experience gives me some perspective. So the way to circle back to your question that I balance it is to look at the human being. And that's hard when you're in your emotions. I know that, Los Angeles, I've been in your traffic. That's hard, but it's so much more rewarding when you do.
I have 60 seconds for each of you on this final question. There is one final argument that one could make that, forgive me for saying this, but maybe your podcast is just adding fuel to a fire that was possibly put out some years ago. There are those who argue we've made great strides to bridge the racial divide, and the playing field is leveling out. I'm going to say it's not perfect. It's leveling out to a degree. So with that said, is your podcast fanning the flame, so to speak, or Todd, should we keep the fire burning on this race conversation and really keep talking about this? I got 60 seconds for you and then 60 for Andre.
Yeah, I mean, the proof is in the pudding. Every one of our guest conversations, they want to have another conversation and then another conversation after that. People feel more connected. They feel more informed. They feel transformed in some way. I think it's not whether we should have conversations, but how we have the conversations. And I think what we provide with Healing Race is a way to not dance around topics to keep the peace, where we can be real, but also move the ball forward.
Andre.
I like embers, right? So as long as a person is having an uncomfortable emotion, that means growth is possible. So I wouldn't say fan the flames, but we are certainly stoking the embers. And that's a good thing because you can't rebuild until you kind of destroy what's already there. And that's a great thing because now you get to write the narrative in whatever direction you want. And who wouldn't want to write a more positive narrative about their own lives and connectedness in the world? We live in a marvelous world full of marvelous people, but we allow these artificial institutions to keep us separate when it just doesn't have to be so.
Now I know why the two of you are such great friends after 30 years and have a really great and popular podcast, Healing Race. Andre Thomas, Todd Levinson, thank you both so much for this great interview.